see the it's changed. You used to say this meeting is being recorded. Now it says
Yeah.
in progress. Perfect. Okay, everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Quentin Stuckey, otherwise known as Stux. I make videos to do with narrative, psychology, philosophy, literature, high sensitivity. And today I'm really excited to welcome back William Allen, author of this book, Confessions of a Sensitive Man, An Unconventional Defense of Sensitive Men. This can be bought at your local book retailer. I suggest going to Indigo, buying it off of Amazon, wherever books are sold. It's a really amazing book. I just finished it relatively recently. I really recommend it for anyone to read, regardless if you're highly sensitive or not. And so I wanted to bring William back onto the channel to do a little follow-up interview because before we start recording, we were just talking about how it's almost been a year since our last interview. Our last interview was in November, and it was a very different time. You know, COVID was still raging. I mean, COVID is now still raging, but you know, you in the U.S., you know, we were in the midst of an election, and then we've seen the results of that. So a lot has changed. A lot has changed. There's vaccination rates are going up. You know, things are starting to reopen. You know, there's a lot of controversy over the vaccines and so forth, at least like, you know, in the US and Canada. I'm not exactly sure how it is in other countries, but so a lot has changed. Like, and I want to ask you, William, what has changed for you? If you could pinpoint a couple of things, what has changed for you since our last interview?
Well, quite a bit, actually. I was mentioning to you earlier that you were my second podcast or YouTube interview, and I've had quite a few since then. Been able to find other people who are interested in the topic, and I've had a chance to meet a lot of people all over the world, actually, and it's been a great experience. One of the interesting things I have found is that regardless of where you are in the world, this topic of high sensitivity in men who are highly sensitive is both problematic for them and also enlightening when they find out more about the trait. So it's not something, as I wrote my book, it was always been a kind of a problem for me growing up, especially in the area of the US that I grew up in. And something I struggled with all my life. And now I've got to a point where I'm realizing that I'm embracing the trait, which is the thing that I think all of us highly sensitive people, and especially men, need to do. And then once you've become acclimated to that, it's really on us to start educating other men and other people generally about what high sensitivity is. So that's been kind of a flow that I've been sort of following the last year or so since we talked last. And I've been in a highly sensitive conference for men. It was done for International HSP Center. Suzanne Dumont Mortier sponsored that. It was a beautiful conference. A lot of men attended, a lot of women attended as well. And it was great meeting people that way as well. But yeah, it's been an exciting year. And we are on the cusp of a highly sensitive movie that is specifically targeted for men called Sensitive Men Rising. Tracy Cooper is one of the producers of that, and also an author and educator on high sensitivity. And Will Harper is the director. He did the other highly sensitive movies. One of the neat distinctions about the highly sensitive movie, the first one they did, is that it just won some recognition for being one of the top documentaries out there on in streaming download land. And that's really been a big boost for the topic of sensitivity in these documentaries. They've done quite a few of those, but I'm really looking forward to this movie, Sensitive Men Rising, because I think it's going to be a game changer. I think it's going to be an eye opener, and I think it's going to be something that's going to spread the word to other men about this trait of high sensitivity. One of the big problems that we have with men is they don't want to admit that they have this quality, even if they know that they do. So this is going to be a good step in trying to normalize the idea that high sensitivity is not only is it a natural, normal trait, but it's an important one.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw the trailer for that not too long ago. and I was completely energized by it, completely energized. I had seen the first documentary actually shortly after first reading Dr. Elaine Aron's book. And that book was, I mentioned it so many times on this channel, and I think even in conversation with you, that book was recommended to me by a therapist that I was seeing at the time. And because she suspected, not only suspected that I had the trait, but also had me take Dr. Elaine Aron's questionnaire. And I scored very highly on it. I think it's out of 15. I think I scored about a 13 or 14. And
Right.
so I shortly after that I watched the I think it was called, I think it had a similar title, The Sensitive Man Rising. I think it was just called Sensitive Rising, if I'm not mistaken. I'll put the trailer for that one and then The Sensitive Man Rising in the description for people that are interested. Definitely go and check it out. I came across not too long ago as well. There was I think it was a GoFundMe page for the Sensitive Man Rising
Yeah.
documentary. And I wanted to actually donate money towards it, but then I saw that the donations were closed. So I'm not sure if they've gotten the budget that they wanted now, or maybe they just closed it momentarily. I'll have to go back and look, but
Yeah.
I really wanted to invest.
I think where they're at on that is that the first round of funding it came up quite a bit short. And they were looking to bring in somebody with name recognition to help generate the kind of funds they need to do to get the movie going. And they did. They found the actor Luke Goss, I think is his name. And he is signed on. He's going to be a part of it, just like Alanis Morissette was the first movie.
Yep.
They got a celebrity face for high sensitivity for men. I think that's built some momentum. I know that Tracy right now is doing some interviews for the movie. You know, I haven't seen their timeline or anything like that, so I can't really comment or talk about it, but I think it's starting to take off. There may be another round of funding that comes again, but if it is, you know, it'll be out there, and I'm sure I can get it to you if I know what the link is, or you can find it, I'm sure, easily.
Yeah.
And just make sure people get that, because it's going to be huge. It's going to be a huge game changer, I think, for sensitive men. So
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like we were sort of, I'm doing a master's program right now, and we've been talking about, we're reading this book called New Grub Street by what the hell is his first name? Forgetting already. It's by Gissing. I think his name is William Gissing. I believe the book is somewhere over there. And it's a 19th century book that is often used by scholars to talk about the history of book publication in the later 19th century. And, you know, we were talking about in class, like, because one of the articles that we'd read, one of the critiques of this book is that, well, why should a fictional text, or why should a fictional text in the popular sense, in the popular form sense, in that, you know, people buy more fiction than they do nonfiction typically. You know, why should that be held as evidence for what has happened in a particular time period? You know, why should that matter? Why should we look at cultural texts? And I think that, you know, if you like, I know people that, for example, that have watched one documentary about veganism, and they changed their life. They decided to go vegan. They decided to go plant-based, or they decided to modify their diet in some ways. You know, people are, you know, there's so much of what we don't know, and there's real power in finding things out that you don't know. And suddenly your whole paradigm shifts. And I think that a film, you know, a book can do this too, but a film, in that, you know, I don't want to say it's a bit more accessible, but it's a bit, you know, not everyone loves reading. I know tons of people that don't like reading. They're not going to want to sit down and read a book. They would much prefer to watch a documentary on a subject that interests them. So I think in that sense, a documentary is a great idea, and it's been a long time coming. And I think even, and this is something that we were also touching on in our last interview, I think even within the context of this COVID-19 pandemic, and now that, you know, we're starting to slowly kind of come out of it, I think that there's going to be a lot of restructuring of Western society, Western culture, on so many different levels. And I think that, you know, culturally and philosophically, there has to be some rethinking of, you know, traditional masculinity and what men are here for, because it's certainly not, you know, it's not the same world anymore for men and women, obviously. But you know, I think men in particular, like, and this is like part of the reason I think you see, like, you know, you unfortunately see these groups of men that gather online on you know, online at, you know, 4chan or Reddit or whatever, and they utter some misogynistic comments, or they talk about how disenfranchised they feel. And like, it's easy to to dismiss that group and say, well, those are just extremists, like they hold really extreme views, we shouldn't listen to them. But there's a reason why those men feel that way. And I think that a lot of it goes back to not feeling like they can be vulnerable, and not feeling like they can express any ounce of sensitivity, even if they're not, even if you're not a highly sensitive person. It's really important to express your emotions, and to be vulnerable, especially with other men too. And I have certain male friends that I'll openly talk about my feelings with, and then I have other male friends where the conversation doesn't even come up. And I can see the difference in terms of their level of comfortability with conversations, and I think their level of comfortability within themselves. I think a lot of men, and maybe women too, but I think it's a bigger problem for men. They don't want to balance themselves. They don't want any ounce of say feminine energy to be in their bodies or minds. And I think that that's a big issue. And I think that's a cultural narrative that really needs to be updated. Like I don't want to
Yeah,
say completely reformed, because reformed is like, can be, that can come across as a bit radical, but certainly updated, and certainly renegotiated. Yeah.
right. I think one of the interesting distinctions, I was out walking the other day, and this thought came to me that I think we have so much trouble with, is this idea of feminine masculine energy, and we're confusing that with sexuality, um, or gender. And the reality is that we all have both feminine and masculine energy, and those are energetic things. They don't define who you are physically, they define who you are in a host of other ways. So this idea of embracing a feminine energy, or about, especially for men, is problematic for a lot of men, because they think it feminizes them. It makes them less of a physical man. And the reality is that it doesn't. You're going to have that whether you suppress it or whether you express it. It's there. It's just part of that kind of yin yang balance of energy that is inherently within us. So I think one of the things we have to do is separate those two things. Is to say, okay, if you're born with this genitalia, you're this, and if you're born with that, you're this. And I realize there's lots of variability in how that's expressed in humans, but in reality, it's generally one of the two. That defines you as being either a male or a female. But who you are, the essence of who you are, your core, your personality, what you evolve into as you grow up, is going to be a mixture of those two things. And suppressing the feminine energy that is in all of us, men and women, and likewise for women having masculine energy. We're seeing more of a permissiveness for women to express the masculine energy in the last probably 40 or 50 years. And less so for men. There really hasn't been that liberation for men that says, okay, it's all right for you to be a nurturer or carer, intuitive, a feeling, emotional being, a human being. And so this is where I think we need to do some updating. I think, we need to get out of masculine 1.0 and move into something more advanced, that would reflect an evolution of our species. And this is really where I think highly sensitive men can have a really important role, because for us, we are wired to express that feminine side, right? And it doesn't detract from you being a man. It is actually something, I think, that adds and enhances to you, because you become more complete by doing that. Those are just energies. That's not anything to do with what's between your legs, right? It is really more up to how you express those energies in your life. And because we're so imbalanced, I think what you see is this manifestation through a hegemonic masculinity, what people are calling toxic masculinity, or it's an unbalanced masculinity, is this runaway, dominant, testosterone-laden version of what masculinity is supposed to be. It's an ideal that unfortunately I don't think most men can live up to, even though culturally we're taught to do that from childhood. And so now this idea that maybe we can put a pause on that. You're right. COVID, I think, was a great big pause button on life in the modern world. And I think it's made us think about a lot of things. One of those, of course, is this idea of who we are and how we relate to each other. And I think masculinity and its role in society is part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you said something that you just said something that made me have a thought in terms of something that occurred to me relatively recently, in that a lot of men are afraid to, I think, are also afraid of incorporating any feminine energy, because not only because they think it's going to make me less of a man, it's going to feminize me, but I think also because the definition of masculine is extremely narrow. I think for a lot of men traditionally, they believe, well, it's about dominating, it's about taking power, it's about taking control, it's about, being that alpha male, like that kind of. I always refer to it as like I've always come across guys that are broy, like kind of broy masculinity,
Right,
that
right.
that kind of almost, it's almost like mean spirited. It's not a form of masculinity that I certainly identify with. Like I've had this conversation with with my girlfriend before, in terms of like talking about, what qualities or what, energies each of us bring to the relationship and bring to our lives. And I said, well, I think that when I feel that I'm in my masculine essence, if you can call it that, is, when I'm doing school, when I'm being organized, when I have to-do lists, when I feel like I have a sense of direction or a purpose, or um, you know, the earliest, the earliest example of the ideal man that I had in my life, the kind of father figure, I guess is a better way of putting it, would certainly be my dad. And I've learned over the years that the way that my dad is very, I would say he's not as balanced. I'd say he's more on the masculine side. And there are people that definitely favor one side over the other,
Sure.
it's very hard it's hard to be completely 50-50. And so he definitely favors more of a masculine energy. And I've realized over the years that he does have a feminine energy to, like, counterbalancing that, because I was quarantined with a family member here. They had COVID, and my dad instinctively wanted to, provide, which is a masculine quality, wanting to provide in traditional masculine quality, especially in evolutionary terms. He wanted to provide food. He wanted to, pick up medication from the drugstore. He was in that mode, and it wasn't like a mode of like, I need to take control, I need to be dominant. It was like, how can I do to help? How can I do to provide? And I think that that's a big difference between the way that men traditionally think about it, which is like, I need absolute control over everything. I need to dominate. I need to, I need to feel that I'm in control, that I'm in power. And that's like the dark side of masculinity. That's like the shadow side from like a Carl Jung perspective. And there's a shadow side to femininity too. Like, um, you know, the shadow side to femininity could very well be, uh, being too, it's hard to think of like a shadow side of femininity, but perhaps, being too passive, not being assertive enough, perhaps going with the flow too much, and I think that also, I think at some point we need different terms, because people do confuse masculine and feminine with male and female. So I think that, along the lines, we need different terms, like, feminine as like feminine. I always think of like femininity as like water. It's, it free flows. And then I think of masculinity like structure and order. Masculinity is almost like a tree with branches, you know.
Mhm.
Um, but Yeah, I think that that's a danger that, especially a lot of boys that I grew up with, because we assume that it's better today, but it isn't entirely. If it was better today, I don't think that there would be this sort of this kind of crisis of identity that I think a lot of men feel. And I think that they don't even know that that's what they feel, and they express it in ways that are traditionally toxically masculine, by by going online and writing hurtful, hateful things about women or other, groups of people, or, in the extreme of that, enacting violence upon other people or upon themselves. So I think that the sense of, the sense of unbalance that they feel, emotional, psychological, spiritual imbalance, is displaced onto someone that's an easy target, or, you know, it's unfortunate. And that's obviously not the case with all men that are out there that are, you
Right.
know, in pain, because, you know, partially because they feel as if they can't express their emotions. But it's definitely a phenomenon that you see nowadays. Have you ever read, there's a book that I read not too long ago too. It's called it's written by, what's his name? David Dita. I think his name is David Dita. I think that's how you pronounce it. The Way of the Superior Man. Have you ever heard of that book or
Oh
read it
yeah, I
before?
read that a couple of years ago. Yeah, that
Yeah,
was
I thought that was really interesting. It's a bit, some people, it has its lovers and it has its haters. It's a bit controversial because I think it also defines masculinity in a bit more of a traditional sense. And but I've actually talked to a lot of women that have read that, and they've really enjoyed it too. And, you know, another good example of, and this is something that was also talked about in the book, is that, you know, you can have a relationship with, you can have a heterosexual relationship or a homosexual relationship, any relationship, and, you know, one partner can be a bit more masculine, one partner can be a bit more feminine, and it's not always the man is more masculine and the woman is more feminine. A lot of the times it's reversed. I know relationships like that. My girlfriend's parents have a relationship exactly like that. Her mother is, you know, the matriarch of the family, the one with the high salary, brings home the food, and then her father was the one that was more maternal to her as she was growing up, and really did a lot of the child care while his
uh,
wife was out there earning money. So like they can easily be reversed, you know.
relationships can be in a state of balance too. Here's the thing about balance. It's balance is not, I don't think, is a static state. It's a dynamic state. You flow back and forth within balance. You know, it sometimes balances one way, shifts to the other, whatever. But on average, it stays in a kind of state of balance, right? So it's not static. It's something that's dynamic. But you have to allow that flow to occur. And I think that happens, like you were mentioning about these relationships. You can have a relationship with a man may express more feminine energy, a woman more masculine energy. That does not take away from them as male and female. What it does is balances the relationship. And that can go back and forth between them too. So it's a dynamic kind of interaction. The problem is that we've kind of skewed everything where we're ignoring the other part, whatever it may be, whether it's feminine or masculine. And we're trying to live up into, especially for men, trying to live in this sort of mythological masculine energy, this masculine definition. And masculinity and femininity are culturally defined. They're not necessarily something you're born with, something we learn as we grow up. This is what boys do, this is what girls do, that kind of thing. And it's taught to us by our parents and by society and by everybody around, and the culture, movies, music, film, everything is teaching us what men and women are supposed to be like. And that's where that stuff is defined. So what's heartening about this is I think we can change that. We can redefine what that is. And what I'm finding is, and even in my personal experiences, having people I care about who are in the LGBTQ community plus, is that as they go through their process of defining who they are, not only to themselves, but to the world, they're edging that definition of what gender is and how we define gender. And that's steadily moving it into a different place. It's molding, it's changing it. And those are things we need to pay attention to, because I think especially younger generations are much more open to that than even my generation was, which was supposed to be a very open and you know, progressive generation. I think the younger generations are the ones that are going to make this change happen. And I think that's why it's really important now for people in my age group to be talking to younger men, especially about high sensitivity men, is from a point of perspective, you know, that I grew up in a time when sensitivity was really not at all condoned for men. But as I'm an older man now, I can look back and say, I see where it needs to change, because I was miserable. I was not myself. I wasn't being authentic. You know, I wasn't allowed to be who I wanted to be. And I think a lot of men, even if they're not on the high end of the spectrum, and it is a spectrum, sensitivity is a spectrum, just think of it as a bell curve. those that aren't in the top 20%, that are the high sensitive people, there is a big middle part there that is where people have these some of these traits as well. They're just not as pronounced, and they're having difficulty with the idea that somehow or another the expression of emotion is not encouraged for men. The idea that men are supposed to be nurturing, not just providers, but nurturing. That we're not supposed to be all logical all the time. And I think the worst thing that the worst joke that the people who developed GPS systems was that they put a feminine voice behind it for guys to have to listen to this, getting instruction and direction from a woman. That's I think is sort of comeuppance on men, because men don't like asking for direction because it's a sign of vulnerability.
Yes,
Not
absolutely.
knowing where you are. God knows if you walked into a hardware store and didn't know where to find a certain tool, you'd rather not ask. You'd rather struggle for an hour trying to find it than to say,
Yeah.
where's that tool? That's how crazy this is. The expectation is so insane.
I also
Uh,
find for me sometimes it's like I feel, and I don't know if it's a different, I don't know if it's different, if it's the same sort of feeling because I have a more, I have more of a like I have more feminine essence. Like I think that over the years I've put myself in more of a state of balance, I would say. I used to be feel like on, being very candid right now, I used to feel afraid of my I knew that I had a masculine essence and there was masculine energy within me. I used to be a bit afraid of that because when I was growing up, I associated masculinity with the boys on the playground who were constantly, roughhousing and were disruptive during class and were, getting in trouble all the time. And I did not identify with them at all. And
right.
so, and when you're young, obviously you can't really pinpoint, like the nuances of people's behaviors and all that. But anyways, I find that if I am going somewhere, or I don't know where I'm going, or I don't know where something is, I'm often hesitant to ask someone because I think that it makes me appear incompetent, which I think is also sort of a masculine fear, this kind of fear of like of 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 admitting that you don't know what you're doing or admitting that you don't know something. I know tons of guys that know next to nothing about some sort of, whether it's a social issue or a political issue, or even about, like a theory of psychology or something like that, some sort of domain, but they feel the sense that they need to talk as if they know what they're talking about. And I think that that's also just a big issue with people too, is not being able to admit what you don't know or what you don't understand, because tons of things that we don't know or understand, and it takes a lot of self confidence and humility to recognize that. I mean, I don't know, maybe there's people out there that do know everything, but there's certainly a lot to learn. I think also too that, and this is a point that was also in Way of the Superior Man, the book that I referenced earlier, where they were talking about, because it was written in the 90s, I believe, and he was talking about how, and he's written another version of that book that was more directed towards female readers, and he was talking about how, the strides that we've made for gender equality, like since the 60s, like it's given, for the most part, equal opportunities between men and women, at least in the Western world. He said, but we've paid a bit of a price for that, which is interesting take on it. He's like, we paid a bit of a price for it in that, we have women who feel pressured to be more masculine in business, and men who feel more pressured to be, feminine in their everyday lives. And he said, some people should be themselves, and no matter what their essence is, they shouldn't feel pressured to act one way or another. And so encouraging, and I don't think this is a point he made in the book, but this is a point that I'm making nonetheless, that people should be encouraged to be themselves and to do what feels right and natural to them. And, parsing out, is this what I want, or is this what society tells me that I want? That's really, really tricky. It's really, really tricky, but I don't think it's impossible,
Well, I think that really what we should be thinking about is looking at this as a human trait, right? Not as a man trait or a woman trait. It's a human trait. Emotions are human. They're not. We sort of branded it as a feminine or female type characteristic, but emotions are not that. There's reasons we have emotions. They drive behavior. baked into our nature because of for protection reasons, for a lot of other things, to allow us to bond with each other, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with them. The idea, though, is that I agree with you 100%. I think we should be who we are, and I think what we should give, especially men, permission to flow whatever way they're flowing at that moment. If it seems to be more feminine, then fine, let it be that way. If it seems to be more masculine, fine. I'm not saying that if you are naturally someone who is a protector, a leader, a take charge kind of person, that you have to suddenly become vulnerable and weak, which is not what vulnerable means in my category, but that's the perception of it, right? The idea is that you be who you are, right? But you allow yourself to fully express yourself in all of your humanness. And that includes having some of these traits that we associate with women. And the same thing is true for women. You know, for years I did this with my daughters, raise them up. You can be whatever you want to be. You can do what you want to do. You know, you can be this or that. And even if it's a traditional masculine field, you can do that. Boys have not been given permission to do things that are non-traditionally male for the most part. Do you want to be a nurse? That's fine. You can be a nurse. That's a helping person. That's a person, if that's the career area you're driving. You want to be a school teacher. You want to be doing something that is, you want to be a chef, or you want to be something that is not sort of fits the mold of being this macho masculine man. That's where we're not giving our boys the permission to do the things that they can do. Whatever is driving them. So I wrote a piece for my blog about parenting, especially highly sensitive children, especially highly sensitive boys, is listening to them as they're growing up. This is an active, engaged task that a parent has to do. The kid will tell you what they want to be if you listen. You still have to give guidelines and parameters and stuff like that. Children need those boundaries too. But the idea is that if you listen, your child will tell you who they are. They'll tell you what they want to be. And by listening to them, you can be a better parent to them. You build confidence in them because they have confidence in who they are. They don't have to be somebody else to make you happy. And you wind up with a more self-actualized individual growing up. Confidence being the thing that's the operative word here, because you can walk confidently in life if you accept who you are for all you are. So I think it's really important. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Like, and I think that you're right, because I was watching, there's this evolutionary psychologist, can't think of her name at the moment, but she was talking about how she's writing a book on sort of like similar line of what we're talking about, the relationships between, men and women in the 21st century and what that looks like, especially living in, a lot of people argue that we don't live in a post-feminist world, but we do live in a world that's, I mean, there's still fourth wave feminism going on, obviously, but in a world where, again, there's greater gender equality, by most accounts in the Western world. And she was talking about how she was reading self-help books that were marketed for men and then self-help books that were marketed for women. And she found that the self-help books that were marketed for women all had the similar thesis, which was that, you go girl, you don't need to change. You're awesome. You can do anything. You're fine the way you are. Don't let people tell you can't do things. And then the self-help books that were written for men had the thesis of, you need to get your shit together. You need to take responsibility. You're not good enough. You need to you really need to organize yourself. You need to do this. And she found that really striking. And she kind of, said that these are completely different messages that girls and boys are given. And boys should also be told that it's okay to be who they are. Boys should not be told that they are not good enough, because how is that any better than telling women that they're not good enough? I mean, it's a different sort of set of circumstances, due to the, historical oppression of women. But at the same time, if we're talking about 21st century, relationships between sexes, or 21st century, traditional conceptions of gender, then it's important that people be allowed to be who they are, and that they're encouraged in the same way. We shouldn't encourage one gender over another. It's not, that's almost retrogressive. It's almost going backwards from where we came from. And yeah, I think that, and even I've even seen this in the effect of just making YouTube videos, or also like I really like broke into writing about highly sensitive people and content concerning high sensitivity when I wrote an article for Highly Sensitive Refuge, which was the first article. They told me it was the first article that they had ever had submitted by a highly sensitive man, and I still get messages about it to this day. I've gotten at least 15 or 20 just Instagram messages of men and women telling me how much they enjoyed reading the article and how it's encouraged them to learn more about the trade, or it's
Yeah.
encouraged them to see their relationship with their boyfriend in a different light, or their relationship with their son in a different light, or the relationship with themselves in a different light. And so I think that just raising awareness, it is still like, it's still a small community. I was in a couple months ago, I interviewed Julie Staub, who is an HSP life coach, and she has these chat rooms, and I was in one, and there was about 120 highly sensitive people in there, like, and I was excited that there were so many of them. But it's unfortunate that there's not more people willing to sit down and talk. But then one of the things that I remembered is that it's still only about 15 to 20% of the population. I mean, it's a large group of people. It's significant, but it's not as vast as, say, it still runs contrary to obviously the majority population. And so I think that it for a lot of people, it's such a niche topic. But I think that that's expanding, and sort of what we were talking about earlier with the Highly Sensitive Men documentary. That's just going to expand knowledge of the trade. Even again, we talked about this the last time, even doing what we're doing right now is expanding knowledge of the trade, and doing what you're doing. Like, what other podcasts have you been on, and what other experiences have you had, like talking about your book and talking about high sensitivity?
Well, it's interesting because there are not tons and tons of podcasts about high sensitivity per se. So I've reached out and talked to, like, for example, I did something with Andy Grant on Real Men Feel, which is part of the Good Men Project, which was a wonderful interview. I enjoyed the heck out of doing that. I worked with a guy from Great Britain. I think it's Jazz Rothi, I think is his last name. He's an INF asterisk, and that's his podcast is about that. But he really got into the topic of high sensitivity. I wish I had a list in front of me of the ones that I've done. I've even been on a podcast about raising boys, period, just boys, period, by two educators, which I had a blast with them. They're both ex-educators. They run a body, I think it's On Raising Boys or On Boys podcast or something like that. That was great. And we had a chance to talk about these things, about the exact same things you and I are talking about. Masculinity, what does it mean? How do you raise a boy to allow him to be who he is so he can grow up to be healthy and confident in who he is? But there, like I said, I think you're right about this idea that it's a ripple in a pond. It's starting to move outward now. When Elaine Aron wrote the book in '96, it did well, I think, and a lot of people read it, like myself, and said, wow, that's who I am. And then I put the book down and went on with my life. It wasn't later, until after I got out of working, retired, that I started to realize that, there's something to this that needs to be told. There's more to it. There's more depth. And everybody comes to the page with a different angle on this. Anybody that comes to me and says, look, I'm writing a book on this, I just try to encourage the heck out of them to do it, because we need more stuff in print. That means we get more coverage. That means we get more ground covered. I wanted to recommend a book. We've talked a lot about vulnerability, but it's a friend of mine who I just recently met this year. His name is Thomas Anderson. He's from Sweden. He was a project manager at Volvo. And it's interesting enough, I met so many highly sensitive men who have been involved in IT, and I thought it was a curiosity, because I always thought I was kind of an odd man out, because I worked in IT, and it was really, in many ways, not a good fit, but it was a good fit. So, I mean, I guess that's the reason why. But anyway, Thomas has written a book called The Vulnerable Man, and it's about his experiences. And this is what is really interesting about it. He's Swedish. but culturally you can identify with the same kinds of elements that you have here in the States and in Canada and Great Britain and most of the Western world. It is this idea that, you know, men have to be this way and women have to be that way. And he was floating back and forth. And it's an interesting study of his life, how he's come through it, things that he did, and some observations that he had. So anybody that's interested in reading more about that from a slightly different cultural point of view, but on that topic of being vulnerable. And that really is one of the things that I think men are struggling with, is this idea that we have to be always on. We have to always be in control. We have to know everything we're supposed to know. We can never ask for help. You know, men are traditionally don't get the counseling they need. They don't get the medical care they need because it's that idea of being vulnerable. So it's a great book to help bring out that idea that vulnerability is not a weakness. It's a recognition that you're not Superman and that you can't do everything for everybody and be in control all the time. And that's something I think men need to start letting go of as well. And what I'm going to plug this shamelessly. I've got another book coming out, hopefully this fall, and it's going to be more of a guidebook. The first book was about my experiences and some observations I had. This is going to be more of a guidebook. Its working title right now is called On Being a Sensitive Man. And I haven't got the subtitle yet, and it's in editing now. So I'm hoping before the end of the year, I can get it back out there. It'll be the follow-on companion edition to The Sensitive Man. But I certainly would encourage anybody who's thinking of taking up the mantle, if they recognize that they are sensitive, get yourself educated as much as you can about the trait. That is a comfort thing. It isn't about preparing you for anything. It's about you being comfortable with the trait, embrace the trait, and then get out there and start spreading the word about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And in any form that looks like, you know, like for me, you know, that's YouTube videos, or that's, you know, submitting articles to Highly Sensitive Refuge. I think that they've had a couple of men write for them ever since
I've written
that
a couple
article.
articles for them.
Yeah, I think that you've definitely been featured on there. I think you've been featured a couple times also on Elaine Aaron's website. I think so.
Well,
Excerpts
she did something for me. Yeah, I was really appreciative of that. She picked up the book and read it and put a little blurb in there for it. So
yeah, she's amazing. She's such a powerful figure. And I remember, but you know, she's so obviously she's so humble about it. I think in traditional sort of HSP fashion, that you know, I remember watching one of her lectures online, and she said at the beginning, she said, you know, I never expected to be in the position of being at the front of this parade with the baton leading it. You know, I don't like to think of myself that way. I like to think of myself as, you know, a learner and explorer. And I just happened to stumble upon something that was real and that took up space. And as a consequence, I found this explanation for who I really was and what I could be, and how, you know, our culture just didn't recognize it. And, you know, even as I go along sort of in my, you know, education, like it is my goal, ambition to be a professor, but then, you know, also realizing that I would be completely happy, you know, like my girlfriend, for example, is she's a self-published author, and she writes YA fantasy books, and she's really trying to formulate like a business sort of model. And, you know, I've, you know, always tell her, I said, if I can help you in any way, just let me know. And, you know, realizing I'm like, I would be very content to, you know, like help her with her business full time and be in service for someone else. You know, it's not and that's one of the things that, you know, I definitely have and I think that this sort of harkens back to this balance between masculine and feminine energy. I have this side of myself, this nurturing side that wants to be of service to people and wants to help people. But then I do have another side that, you know, certainly wants to put my ideas out there and put myself out there and to, you know, to lead something. But, you know, I think that, you know, and realizing that, I think I would be happy in you know, whatever sort of position I do, as long as it sticks with the values that I have for myself personally. And yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the IT example. Why do you think that is? What did you like about IT that was beneficial to your high sensitivity? Was there anything about IT that was beneficial?
Well, I think one of the things that I enjoyed the most of it, when I was more of an individual contributor, I did some programming stuff and some things like that. And that's like solving problems. And you go into a cubicle and you just kind of be away from things and work on a problem, specific thing. And a lot of people that I talked to in IT that were HSPs kind of like that aspect. You get to solve a problem, whatever. I moved into management somewhere in my career and I stuck with it. That was probably the most difficult thing. The interfacing with people was great. I enjoyed that. I loved working with my team. They're smart, bright people. A lot of them were highly sensitive. And I enjoyed doing that part of it. I enjoyed the interaction with them. And I enjoyed showing them that somebody could really care about them as people. They're not just, people that are delivering a product or a service or whatever. That they could be, work-life balance was a big deal and has been and always will be in my book. And so I want to make sure that they were taken care of. And that's one of the things I did. That's that nurturing part of me. So it appealed to that.
Mm-hmm.
The part I didn't like was the competitive corporate, always on, never off, being up at 3 o'clock in the morning on a bridge line, trying to solve a problem, and then going back to work at noon and working the rest of the day. It's that kind of stuff is the antithesis of what I think highly sensitive people thrive in. It's just not a good environment for that. So I found it kind of surprising that so many people that I have met so far either have some background in IT or, were in it and they're out now. And so it gives me a little comfort that I got wound up in it. I was wanting to be like you. I had a bachelor's degree in psychology. I wanted to go to graduate school, and life took me in a different direction. I would have loved to have taught and done research. That was my real heart of hearts right there, is doing research. But it didn't happen. So I took a different path, and this has led me to where I am now. I'm happy with it. So good luck going forward with that. We need people like you out there as thought leaders and people teaching the next generation of people about this quality and about broader issues like we've talked about, masculinity and the kind of balance that we need in our world today, which is really out of balance in a very bad way.
Yeah, definitely. I think that I really appreciate you saying that, especially someone like you who I really admire and respect even more, like after finishing your book, even more so, if that was even possible, really. Like I have enjoyed getting to know you, our conversations, even, it's been getting to know you virtually, but it's still, it's still that sense of understanding and that sense of connection. And what was my original thought? Yeah, I think that that I think getting the word out there, and I think also, teaching the next generation, I think is really important too. I'm teaching to 2 sections of students for an undergraduate intro to fiction class, and they're all 18-year-olds, most of them, and obviously I don't talk about high sensitivity in what I teach, but I think even just like I can see my sensitivity coming out in various ways. I always start the class, because I'm doing it virtually. I always start the class, well, how is everyone doing today? Like, I'd love to hear how you're feeling. And I always try and encourage them, if they need anything, if they have any questions, anything at all, to always reach out to me, or to come to my office hours, like online, if they want to just like, chat about school if they're having a hard time with something, or just chat about their life too. Like I think that's I remember how I felt as an undergrad, and if I having someone like that there, for me, that was my boss, my first job at the university. He was definitely the person that I went to, like the adult, quote unquote, that I went to. And I think that's really, and I think that's also a way that I think men that are perhaps have more of a traditional mindset, that they can get more accustomed to this idea of sensitivity, and that sensitivity is it's also a bit of it's a spectrum of a definition to some degree, in that there are different ways that you can express it, and there are different ways that sensitivity looks, like, so like asking my students, being in the control of a classroom, but asking my students how they're doing, I have the option of not doing that at all. I could be totally insensitive and say, okay, everyone's here, let's get to it. All right, great. and then logging off and not, not giving a shit about how they're feeling. And so I think that, and that's that's some of, like, I've used examples like that when I've been talking with, not just my male friends, but female friends that I have as well. When I say, well, sensitivity, it comes out in different ways. It's expressed in different ways. It's not what you think. It's never usually what they think, which is like, the typical, like, crying at a sad movie, or, just constantly talking about, their negative feelings. It's not, it's really not what sensitivity is, especially in relation to like the biological trait of sensitivity. And, I always encourage every person I talk to about high sensitivity to read Elaine Aron's book. And then men that I've come across that are interested in high sensitivity, I'm always recommending that they read your book as well.
Thank
So, like and I think that's the key, because people get really curious, and they do want to know. But, like and I went through the same thing. It's like it was a whole paradigm shift once I read that book. And once, even just being in therapy, was a huge paradigm shift, and being able to sit there and talk with someone openly and unapologetically about what was on my mind. And this person that was completely unbiased and was interested in really helping me sort out whatever issues that I was having. I think that was really powerful. It was really powerful relationship to have. It's so important that we get out of our comfort zones, and that we learn new things about ourselves. Like, we're never done learning, and it's so important that we challenge like our notions and ideas about things. And I think that's also something today that we have a harder time doing, especially with the advent of social media, where you can have all these different competing voices, spewing their opinions, and they're reacting to things very quickly, like disliking or liking things, literally on Facebook.
Right.
And so I think that it's harder. It's getting hard. It's difficult, a little bit more difficult nowadays to disseminate thought, and especially thoughtful thought, which often entails challenging your own biases and your own assumptions and what you believe and so forth. So yeah, I think that there's still a lot of work to be done, but
well, this whole area, this whole part about sensitivity is, there's Elaine Aron likes to define it in essentially four things. And so I kind of stick with that, the four main areas where we talk about overstimulation, about depth of processing, about emotion and empathy, and then this subtle sensing of things that we have, this capacity. But if you think of those as four branches of a large tree, right? And there are so many things that are hanging off those branches that we still don't know yet. And they're starting to do really good research stuff with fMRI imaging, so that they can kind of track where it's going on in the brain, finding where we differ in the way we look at things and see things and stuff like that. And a lot of this is, I think it's a really difficult thing for men, is to embrace this term sensitivity, because we've got these pejorative definitions of what sensitivity means. It's weak, it's not effeminate, it's not this, it's not that. But really, there's a whole sensory component of this, that's sensitivity, that we're not grasping. It's like, if you were to reframe this and say, well, like Superman had X-ray vision, or he had the ability, suddenly it would be changed, because that in many ways is kind of like what sensitivity is. It's the ability to process data. It doesn't mean we have better eyes or ears or whatever, but our brains have the capacity to process more of the data that comes in through those sensory organs. And so that is in many ways a superpower, but we're not expressing that enough yet to men, particularly because they're still seeing it from the emotional and that emotional reactivity point of view. And they see that as being unfortunate. So there's a lot of work we have to do. I'm hoping the movie is a good start. You doing your podcast is a great start. More people writing books about it, more men stepping up to it. Those are the kind of things that are going to shift the needle. And I think it's going to happen. It may take a couple of generations. and I know sometimes change takes that long, but we're starting it now, and I'm seeing it. And I applaud you and all the other people that are doing podcasts that are talking about this. Yeah,
no, that's good. Honestly, completely agree with you, William, 100%. And I do think that is an issue where people's we substitute it's interesting how human beings, we substitute things that are complex, like complex concepts or phenomenon, into simpler definitions, into kind of this like black or white, sort of terminology. And so, when people hear sensitive, they immediately hearken some sort of image in their mind or some sort of idea that's usually culturally informed, typically. But then when you start to pick apart, this idea of sensitivity, and then you start to realize, well, wait a minute, like emotions come from somewhere. Like emotions don't just like appear out of nowhere. They come from the circuitry of your brain. And when they grasp that idea of like, well, some people are just more, I've talked about this with several people, several people that have openly said, not that they don't understand sensitivity, but they can't understand anxiety or depression. And like one of the simplest explanations is that some people are wired differently. There's neurodiversity, is the term that
Yeah,
they refer to that
absolutely.
as. Like that's life. That's like being human. People are just completely wired differently. Like, and that's also why people have different personalities. And so I think that there was even a recent talk with Dr. Elaine Aron that I think is on YouTube. I think it's from 2020, where she gets more into the specifics of like what parts of the brain are lighting up, what parts of the brain are active in a highly sensitive person's brain, what pathways, what neurons, and like the really, really specific psychological research. And so if people are interested in that, then definitely go and YouTube it, because that gets into
Yeah.
more of the specifics. And I think that the work helps legitimize it. I think, again, I think I mentioned this in our last interview, but I've had so many people say, well, is that really a thing? That doesn't sound like it's real. That sounds like it's made up. And, some people, they require like pretty strict evidence or pretty strict findings to, legitimize something to themselves. And, that's fair enough. But there is like, it's always funny to me when people question it, as if like, people, as if people assume that 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 people are just being totally subjective about their sense of self. I mean, obviously there's subjectivity with your
Right.
sense of self, but yeah, there's legitimate evidence to back it up, obviously. So we're almost at our time. Before we go though, I wanted to ask you again, like we ended the last interview, are there five, actually let's do four. Are there four words to describe how you feel right now?
It's funny because the first two would be, I'm saddened by the way the world is right now, but I'm hopeful. Okay, so the two balance each other. There's another balancing thing going on there.
Yep.
I'm very hopeful because I see that there is an awareness coming about that, and I'm not talking woo woo or new agey kind of awareness. I'm talking about awareness people are realizing, especially young people, that things have got to change. We can't just keep going on and ignoring the problems that we have in the world today, or we're going to destroy ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very hopeful about that. Like I said, I'm very positive in that regard. So it's a sad thing to look at. You watch the news too much and you start realizing that, that every day that there's things to be sad about, but I'm hopeful because I think there's an undercurrent of change. It's in the air. I am really excited too. Another word, excited, because I am excited about what's going on with the high sensitive movement right now, if you want to call it a movement. And I think, especially for men, I see that picking up as well. And so I'm really excited about what's happening there. Finally, I'm trying to think of another word that would describe my mood right now.
Mm-hmm. Or a phrase if you want.
Or phrase, okay.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like we're part of a big movement right now, and we're part of something bigger than us. And those of us who are working in and around this, even some of us that are kind of on the edge of this movement, I think that's something to be looking forward to. It's optimistic and hopeful. Those
Mm-hmm.
drive that second emotion is that there's something bigger that's happening. There's something turning, and I think it's going to get better before it gets too worse. So
Yeah.
I again, and I think people are starting to grasp that. So there's a lot to look forward to in this world, and I'll say this kind of as a final wrap up of the other things, is that I really do believe this in my heart of hearts, that highly sensitive people are going to be energized at some point and are going to be a big part of this transformation. They may not all be leaders. They may not all be, the warriors on the front end, but they will be working around the scenes. They're doing the things that HSPs do best: counseling, advising, warning, being cautious, injecting some sensibility to some of this impulsive, reckless behavior that we see from some of our leaders. So I think there's going to be, it's an exciting time to be an HSP. And I think that going forward, it's going to be even better.
Almost an HSP renaissance.
Yes, I think
in
so.
Its own way. Yeah.
Yeah. You could almost tie those things together. HSPs are really good in that world.
Absolutely. Well, William Allen, thank you again so much for coming on. For those of you that have not picked up his book, it's Confessions of a Sensitive Man, an Unconventional Defense of Sensitive Men. Please pick it up, support William, check out his blog. There'll be links to that in the description below. William, thank you again. I want to have you on again. Absolutely.
Well, when the next book comes out, we'll get together and we'll talk about that. All right.
Fantastic.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.